Thank you for joining today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag session, Rethinking Assignments in the AI World. Our presenter today is Dr. Dina Kurzweil, Director of ETI and Associate Professor of Medicine. Now let's get started with our goals for today's session.
So here are our goals for today. If you could just take a moment and review them. And we'll get started here. If everything works out, you'll be able to define generative artificial intelligence. You'll be able to explain the importance of intentionally designing assignments that support learning. You'll be able to incorporate a few strategies here and possibly even develop assignments that emphasize critical reasoning, ethical decision-making, and human skills over factual recall. So to get us started on this idea of defining generative artificial intelligence, generative AI, or GAI, is a subset of artificial intelligence focusing on creating new original content. So that's things like text, images, audio, video, code, etc. that resembles the data it was trained on. This is an important piece here to understand. GAI is only as good as what information it was trained on. And instead of it just analyzing or predicting, it generates novel outputs. So how does it work? As I said, GAI models are often trained on deep learning techniques like transformer networks and large language models, and learns the patterns and structures within vast amounts of training data. Once it's trained, it can learn these patterns to generate new data in response to the prompts or instructions we put into the system. Now, those systems, if you're part of the USU infrastructure, are usually seen as our tools like Gemini or ChatGPT. So let's think a little bit about the challenges in traditional assignment models. Most of traditional assignment models focus on information recall, which now GAI does instantaneously. And while assignments can help structure foundational knowledge, it's not enough to prepare students for the modern AI, GAI integrated healthcare environments. While early in our education, information recall is really important and still may be required, but specific instructions have to be given if you're going to be thinking about those traditional types of assessments to ensure that students don't use the AI in order to respond. There's a risk that our assignments could encourage kind of this idea of regurgitation of knowledge rather than higher level thinking, such as clinical reasoning and ethical decision making. So think about it this way. We can't use technology to replace human aspects of medicine, such as empathy. So we want to think differently about our assignment models and what we're doing to build those assignments. GAI, AI, this whole world is transforming education, and it's enabling our learners to access resources and even complete assignments with ChatGPT and Gemini. And it's important to recognize that AI is playing a larger role in medical education and practice, morphing kind of the roles and future roles that our learners have. So we need to learn how to intentionally design assignments that support learning and adapt to the evolving landscape of GAI AI in education. GAI can help your students in many ways. So when we think about GAI, it can help you as the faculty member and your students. And it's really important to think about these different paradigms that it can support. It can support idea generation, where you can brainstorm potential assignment types, topics, questions, all of that aligned with particular learning objectives. You can provide a concept and have the GAI suggest essays, quizzes, scenario-based tasks. It really becomes a force multiplier for you. It can help with differentiation. It can specify the difficulty level or the desired modification and can offer adapted versions of an assignment for your diverse learner populations. It can help you with drafting. It can write up initial drafts and outlines of instructions, problem sets, and even rubrics. And this provides a great starting point for you, saving you time on the initial framing of your assignments and the ideas that you have. It can expand upon what you've written and formalize drafts. It can become a peer reviewer with suggestion. Again, force multiple. It can also provide content generation, and it can create supplemental materials like illustrative examples, practice questions with answers, and even potential readings to go with an assignment. All of the work that GAI does can be required to and supplied to the learner as part of the drafting process, this idea of iteration with explanations to your students on how to use that input. So if you think about having your students integrate GAI into it, you can really start helping them build upon what they're doing over time. While all of these GAI tools can be valuable, it does pose challenges for authentic assessment. And while there's no foolproof method to keep learners from using GAI or AI, and I want to say that again, there is no foolproof method to keep learners from using these tools. And AI detectors are not a foolproof way of reviewing assignments. So you want to think about some of these considerations for health profession educators about using GAI. First, always double check the outputs. It's kind of like a journalist's source of information. You need to ensure that both you and your learners know that anything that comes out of these tools must be verified by multiple sources. A lot of times you'll get what's called hallucination, where the actual tool makes up ideas, makes up references. So you want to even verify journal citations. Also, depending on the time of day, your GAI tools can provide very different input for the same actual question that you put in. It's a database that comes from the web up to a specific date. So it's not necessarily always up to date as of the date you are putting in that information. And it's not out there ensuring accuracy. So we as humans still must verify its output. Now, along with verifying the output, you also want to consider privacy. The prompts you create, the information you put into the tool are used by the tool, actually, to develop more learning for the system to learn. So you don't want to put in any sensitive information, any PII, any of that, because it will be used as an output for somebody else possibly later down the road. Now, if you have access to use of these tools, we are partitioned, so that adds a little extra layer of protection if you're using our specific instances. But if you're not, you really need to think about what you're putting in and the privacy around those inputs. So because of all these cautions, it's essential to have a clear policy in your syllabus. And even going beyond that, discuss with your learners your expectations about their use of AI in your assignments. Your policies and discussions should explain to the learners when and how they can use AI as an effective and ethical manner, and have clear guidance that what they'll need to do to successfully complete the assignment and meet their learning objectives. I know this sounds really simple, but this takes time for you to think about. This takes time for you to actually put in the language that represents you and your ideas clearly and succinctly. So don't underestimate the amount of time it's going to take for you to actually come up with your policies, your procedures, to discuss these with your students, okay? This does take time. So one of the things you're going to want to think about are the strategies that you're going to put together to promote reflection and possibly peer feedback in an assignment design, because you want to be sure that the strategies that you're using in an assignment actually promote these ideas. And if you do peer feedback, don't become just an input of your learners into a system, and the student then uses those inputs as their responses to the task. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about actually using effective AI for teaching. So thinking about effective AI in teaching, you need to intentionally design your assignments. How will you be intentional about the use of Gen AI in your classroom? When will you encourage it or prohibit it, and why? The why is important here. Having your students understand that they are developing a grounding in a topic. And just as a side note here, I normally tell faculty, you probably early on in their careers, when they really have to know and provide that type of knowledge back to you on specific ideas. And you probably then don't want to actually have them using GAI. And you have to explain to them why, because they need to know those basic foundational ideas, those definitions, and they're going to ask you about it. So more importantly, even, is how will you communicate your intentions to your students? When you're focused on learning, you need to really think about those new skills and knowledge that your students need given this emergence of Gen AI in both the workplace and actually at home. So how could you use Gen AI to enhance student learning and metacognitive thinking in your course? You want to think about this intentionally again, going back to that intentional design piece. In terms of being supportive to your students, how will you move away from a punitive culture to a culture of support and trust with your students? How will you ensure equitable access to these tools in your classroom? And then finally, being reflective. What will you do to continue learning and sharing ideas about effective teaching in Gen AI? And how will you collect and implement student feedback about your approach to using your Gen AI in your assessments? So really, this is a great kind of chart here for you to really think about the different layers you need to get into about actually effectively teaching and using AI. So let's start off with just the big question. Will assignments need to be adjusted? First, we need to review our current assignments and determine whether or not they need to be adjusted to account for the fact that learners will now be using generative AI. I heard it put this way recently by someone, and I don't remember who it was, that AI is knowledge, or the what, and humans are wisdom, or the how and why. So AI can easily figure out the what about something, but not so much the how and why, right? It has a little bit more difficulty. So if the assignment is focused on the what about something, then it's likely to need to be adjusted to challenge the students to apply that or show the how and why that information should be used in a specific situation, right? So again, think about it this way. AI is the knowledge or the what, and humans are the wisdom and the how and why. So as you're looking at your assignments, keep that in mind as you're going through. And again, I want to emphasize, there is absolutely an appropriate time and place to say, I do not want you using Gen AI in this assignment, but we want to also help our students learn when those times are appropriate. So I'm not saying kill all use of it. I'm saying be intentional and think about your assignments. We also need to rethink the purpose. What should our assignment achieve? You want to emphasize things like clinical judgment and human insight and shift towards higher order thinking. Your assignment should challenge the students to engage in synthesis, evaluation, and decision-making skills that AI can support, but not actually replace very well. This should also require complex decision-making that incorporates things like ambiguity, maybe there's an ethical nuance, and the human context elements that are challenging for AI to navigate. You want to focus on critical judgment, empathy, communication, and ethics. Real-world healthcare demands understanding patient experiences, that emotional support, and ethical sensibility. AI can't fully achieve that. It can get a start, but it's not going to fully achieve that. So future healthcare professionals need to hone that clinical judgment, that contextual understanding, and that empathy, which are key areas where assignments could foster growth. Our assignments focus today will be on developing assignments that do not use AI in enhancing critical thinking and integrating AI into assignments. So in redesigning your assignments, you want to increase the specificity of your questions and tasks. You want to incorporate things like class conversations, case studies, course readings, and even super importantly are those personal experiences. Ask students to cite the textbook or other readings in class. Not only will this create tasks that are more difficult for Gen AI to do, but it will also help students strengthen their contextual understanding of the course content. You want to really think about iterative learning and growth through multi-stage assignments, the idea of initial revisions, reflections. You want to encourage students to submit works in progress, okay, those reports, the drafts, again, the reflections, for low stakes feedback. Have them document where they used AI and provide its response. Throughout the term, structure student to student and student to instructor feedback loops so that students can receive insights and constructive criticisms from both their peers and their instructor. These are more choices for your students, providing more learning opportunities and offering more choices to your students about their learning experiences by fostering intrinsic motivations, providing a few different types of assignments or readings. You might assign 3 readings and allow students to select 2 of their choices. Provide 2 prompts and invite students to choose which ones to answer. Ask students to communicate in a medium of their choice, or ask students to identify their own personal learning goals throughout the term about these assignments. But really taking more time to think about the actual student experience in the assignment is going to help you see the opportunities for you to both use AI and lessen AI's possible impact on your student learning. So develop or redesigned assignments, that is the question. You're going to want to emphasize clinical reasoning a lot more with today's use of Gen AI and that ethical decision making and human skills over factual recall. Now, factual recall, again, I want to emphasize this, and I'm going to say it again later on in the presentation, is appropriate given the student's level. But really thinking about how you're using these tools and what you're trying for your students to get out of them is going to be key. So this idea of factual recall and clinical reasoning, AI can generate factual responses, no question about that, but it struggles with nuanced clinical reasoning. You've got to remember that AI is not thinking, quote unquote, or even analyzing the meaning of the data. It's predicting what words would come next in a series of words based on a lot of other data that's been fed into it. So require learners to analyze case studies and justify decisions, not just provide that basic response, right? So you want them to really think about what was said and provide justification to their response. So instead of list symptoms of myocardial infarction, ask, given this patient's symptoms and history, explain your diagnostic reasoning and prioritize treatment steps. Now, could AI do some of this? Absolutely. But how you structure the assignment and where this is done. Maybe this assignment is done live in class. Maybe it's done peer-to-peer as an activity. Think about case-based discussions. Provide a detailed case study and ask students to outline the diagnostic and management plans. And again, require them to justify their decisions based on clinical guidelines and patient-specific factors in the case. Now, again, can AI provide some of this? Absolutely. Can it provide it to the level you're expecting your students? Not so much. You can also have your students deal with adverse outcome analysis. Create and present a scenario where a clinical error occurred and ask students to identify the error, analyze its root cause, and propose strategies to prevent it in the future. Again, you want to have learners justify their responses and probably even go into the literature and provide some good citations about why they said what they said. So you want to think about incorporating personal reflections with examples. And while AI can replicate a personal experience, if you require the assignment to provide specific examples from their real world experiences, this will limit AI's ability to complete the entire assignment. You want to use prompts like reflect on a time during your medical training where you witnessed a patient's vulnerability and how that experience influenced your understanding of the doctor-patient relationship. How did this encounter shape your perceptions on empathy and compassion in the context of medical practice? This question requires the AI, if a student were to use it, to access and personalize, which AI truly can't do in terms of one person's memories and feelings from that student's lived experience. It doesn't really understand nuanced emotions. So while AI can provide information about empathy and compassion, it can't genuinely grasp the complex emotions involved in such a situation. And AI can't reflect on the personal growth or changes in a perspective that in the same way that a human can. So this assignment provides deep introspection and requires a drawing upon a personal experience and emotions. That's something that's currently beyond the capabilities of AI. You also want to think about assigning these tasks based on medical biases, maybe, where students explore their own potential biases and how these might influence patient care. This is essential in understanding and mitigating some of the disparities in healthcare. You can also develop an assignment that deals with more ambiguity as a case study. So think about case studies with nuanced patient context. You may want to create a case study where students must consider a variety of non-clinical factors, such as the family dynamics, the background, cultural beliefs. These elements could challenge a student to apply empathy and nuanced reasoning beyond a diagnostic data that sits there. AI kind of lacks the ability to fully comprehend or prioritize human values and contextual nuances, especially when patient interactions go beyond just the technical diagnosis. One of the really nice ways that I've seen faculty actually modify their assignments is to think more about longitudinal assessments. So instead of providing just this idea of a paper, you want to assign a multi-step project or paper that requires consistent input over time, such as designing and revising a patient care plan based on feedback or evolving case details. You're able to track the individual progress with checkpoints requiring submissions of the drafts that the student will actually create for you. So let's think about it this way. You may have a project where the student has to do an initial task. And then the student has to come in and actually do a check-in with either you or a peer or a combination of both. And then they can move on to stage 2, which is the second part of the assignment. Then they have to do another check-in on that assignment to review that draft or that initial piece before they go into putting in the final compilation of all these different stages. AI really does struggle with continuity over multiple stages of our project. And this can be done in a variety of ways using a variety of tools. You could use Google Docs if you have access to it, or even using Microsoft Word, applying track changes so that you can see how these actual drafts move into a final stage. But if you're able to actually segment the assignment into multiple stages, you can actually see the growth of the student's response to the assignment and help them build upon it. And again, like I said, AI struggles with doing this. So in-depth reflective assignments. One of the real interesting things I've been seeing are these in-depth ethical reflective assignments, which present students with scenarios involving some sort of an ethical conflict, such as balancing patient autonomy with medical guidance, or addressing resource limitations, or handling sensitive patient data with compassion. Requiring students to provide a response to such a situation or a case will also require students to provide background on their response and decisions. so that these assignments end up cultivating a student's personal judgment, personal reflections. And the students need to justify their decisions and reflect upon the ethical implication, capacities that AI cannot develop or simulate very well, especially if you are going to ask your student to justify their answers. You're going to end up reducing the way that Gen AI can actually provide the answer, because the student needs to justify their decisions, especially on these ethical implications or reflective assignments. Now, collaborative assignments are just wonderful for us to think about because AI cannot replicate the interactive group dynamics. So you want to think about including assignments that involve teamwork, such as developing an interdisciplinary care plan or debating an ethical dilemma in healthcare. You could have the groups provide different phases of the content at different stages with background information on why the assignment was completed the way it was. You can have students actually use AI in this assignment if you wanted to, where they have to address how they used AI and why they used it if you wanted to. Or you could do this completely independent of AI. But these collaborative pieces require the students to work together. And if you are very specific about your either use or non-use of AI, you can really get the students working together to actually respond to an assignment, especially things that could facilitate that interdisciplinary work or care plan or those ethical decisions. Designing assignments where students engage in role-playing exercises with a simulated patient, focusing on communication skills, provides you a really great launching point. This could involve topics like breaking difficult news or providing emotional support to patients and families. Learners can take on different roles with a script for only the provider, and you can have them record these interactions or provide reflections on the experience. You can even think about having the students work in a classroom together and actually do these roles and have multiple cases where one student acts as the provider, the other student acts as the patient and responds to that provider, so that you can see how the students are actually talking to one another, how they're providing emotional support and can provide real-time feedback. Now, one of the nice things about AI is you could actually use it to give you a launching point on actually having those scripts. So think about how you can have your students working together. So we tend to forget about real-time assessments because AI can't participate in these live discussions, right? So thinking about oral exams or oral questioning with your students to see, did they really get the foundational knowledge? Socratic questioning, or even in-class problem solving where students must think on their feet. Thinking about what you do in the classroom is going to help you facilitate some of these assessment features. While you may decide to, let's say, record your lecture, you can then use your in-classroom time to actually think further about how to do real-time live assessments. Imagine a case study where a student uses an AI tool to suggest a different diagnosis, then must defend, and here's the key part, and critique the tool's suggestion based on additional patient context or ethical consideration. This type of assignment not only teaches diagnostic skills, but also the evaluation of AI's role in patient care, which is a vital skill, right, for students to actually think about right now, because more and more of their patients are going to be using these tools. So if they get a sense of what is actually happening, they're able to both expand their knowledge and actually learn about how a type of information AI may be giving their patients. So encouraging literature analysis and review in your assignments could involve students using AI to synthesize large bodies of medical literature. And then you could ask your students to critique the AI curated summary and identify gaps or biases in the data presented. This is teaching students the importance of scrutinizing AI inputs ensuring that they don't take this machine-generated insight just at face value. Again, talking about ethics-driven scenarios. An AI-based ethical dilemma could be developed where students discuss the implications of AI-driven decisions, such as rationing resources or personalizing treatment plans, or even handling sensitive patient data. Such exercises emphasize the ethical responsibility unique to our human practitioners, reinforcing critical values-based decision-making in these complex scenario situations. So you're going to want to consider your grading approach as you choose assignments, as the grading aligns with the goals and the assignments. So as I said early on in this presentation, if you have low-level objectives or recall assignments, be sure your policies on the use of AI are clear. If you want to let students use AI, make sure you have some ways to see what AI provided and how students use that information. In evaluating these assignments, focus on students' reflective abilities, their ethical considerations, and communication skills rather than data accuracy, insights, and depth of engagement should take precedence. And you want to emphasize and place more opportunities on peer and self-assessment. Incorporating peer feedback, either as a stage approach or as an assignment, and self-assessment can encourage your students to view assignments as learning experiences rather than tasks to complete for a grade, right? Most students just tell me, what do I need to do to get an A? Well, we want to move them beyond that, because crafting assignments that emphasize critical thinking, creativity, and practical application can ensure learners develop the skills and knowledge essential for their roles, regardless of AI advancements.
Thank you for watching today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag. You can view all Teaching with Technology Brown Bags on the USU YouTube channel under the full ETI playlist. Have a nice day.